There's a long history of the association between D&D and outdoor survival, and in fact in the AD&D rules you can see, as you can see here, outdoor survival is listed as part of the equipment. I think that really dates to using the map per se and not the actual outdoor survival structure of the game. But what I'm going to do here is do that a little bit. I'm going to bring some version of D&D into the outdoor survival world, and the version that I'm using is going to be the D&D adventure system, in particular Castle Ravenloft characters, and I'm going to be sending them off in the outdoor survival world on an outdoor survival mission. And this kind of mishmash is going to be a combination of Ravenloft rules, some D&D rules, and some outdoor survival rules, and to create a little adventure game to play. I've decided that we're going to be playing a basic search scenario. That's going to be the basic structure. And in this case, I'll show you where we're going to be searching for. But before we just do that, I want to add a little bit of flavor to it. So I'm going to this Tome of Adventure Design, and I'm going to decide that we are searching for some kind of item. And the item it is will be item 36. A magic item. Okay, well, fine. Not much of a story there, but I've got great magic item cards from Dragonfire, and maybe I'll pull one of those in, and that will be what we're trying to find. I can't get to that right now, but I'll do that later. So we're searching for a magic item, and I've decided along the lines of what I always do, which is going with what I've already got. My outdoor survival map that I got with this game has markings on it, and this obviously was used to by somebody to do something probably D&D related. There's markings up and down the side, and in addition to that, somebody has drawn additional roads, and you can see this here. I didn't notice this actually for quite some time on the map, and there's one here actually at the beginning along here. This is not going to really come into play in what I'm doing now, but what is going to come into play is this right here. This little, I'm fairly certain, it's somewhat harder to tell than you would think, but pretty sure that this little indication here, here's the road that was drawn in by somebody, this dot to this house. So this is going to be the site of whatever the magic item, and we're going to be coming in here at the top of the map. This little fellow is going to represent our party, and there he is. That's our party. I'll get into how this works when we start to play, but so our goal is to find this magic item here. Now, for the purposes of what I'm doing right now, it's going to be fairly straightforward and gamey, as it were, as opposed to delving too much into the role-playing story aspect of it, but I will show you points along the way where you could really do that. What we have set up here, this is our life level chart from Outdoor Survival, and every turn there's going to be a supply check, and I will be, the results of that supply check are going to be impacted and recorded here, as well as there's going to be rolling on this personal wilderness encounter table, which comes with the original search scenario. So the effects of this will happen, but there's also going to be a supply check where one of the characters needs to do a saving roll against their constitution to see whether supply is lost or not. We will be pulling in from Castle Ravenloft game the treasure cards, and per those rules, everybody starts out with a treasure, and I'll show you that in a moment. There will be encounter cards that will be potentially happening, and this is based on a table that I have created, which is meant to simulate the fact that as you travel through the environment, things get more likely to be encountered. So, based on a series of 5 game turns, and I'm getting the 5 from these 5 time markers from Ravenloft that I will be using to mark time passing, When it comes to an encounter, we'll be rolling on this table, and depending on how long we are into our travels will be the percentage chance of some encounter happening. An encounter is going to be a monster and possibly the encounter card as well. These are my characters. They are coming from Ravenloft, and they will be used as Ravenloft, sort of straight up Ravenloft, for the combat section of the game, and the monsters they'll be encountering will be also monsters in the Ravenloft system. They're actually fan-made expansion, I guess you could call it, to Ravenloft, because I wanted to get outside of the strictly Ravenloft themed characters. I'll show you those when we get to them. And each character is going to have, based on the rules of Ravenloft, they will be having their cards that they can use and following this rule in terms of how they can be used. So we'll just take a look here at the cleric. Everybody started out with a treasure, again, per Ravenloft rules. This is a total mishmash of rules. He's got a Dragon's Breath elixir, and he will be allowed to attack each monster on his tile without it counting it as an attack action. So that's nice, but it's only a one-time use. He has his Lance of Faith, which is going to give him a +6 if he is attacking somebody within one tile of him. He's got his Beacon of Hope, which everybody can regain a hit point if they're on... each hero on a chosen tile can regain a hit point. And he has his Bless power, where everybody within a tile can gain a +2 bonus to an attack, and then he has his own healing strike for an adjacent monster. Well, you may be asking, there's no tiles here. We're in an outdoor environment. How is this going to translate? Great question. And the answer is, I have created a table, which I will find, that you will, or we will be rolling on before any type of combat occurs to determine our positioning. I've made a basic, what I'm calling an adjacency table. And the three options for adjacency, very loosely defined, are they're either together, and that corresponds to the keyword adjacent in the Ravenloft system. They're scattered, which is sort of within one tile or 10 to 30 feet. Sometimes that is the measure given, or they are afar from each other, and this would be basically anything else, 3 tiles away, more than this distance, 60 feet or whatever. And how do we determine where they are? Well, it's a D10 roll, but it has to do with the environment that they're in. So if they're in a clear or desert scenario, I figured it's sort of more likely that they're either going to be adjacent or somewhat scattered. They're not really going to be afar from each other, although they still could be. Certainly if they're in the woods, mountain, or, well, the woods or the mountain, they're unlikely to be afar, and in rivers or swamp, the same scenario. I think in rivers or swamp, maybe they're slightly more likely to be scattered if they're walking along separately in the river. So I've made this table. You know, how accurate it is to somebody who's actually in the outdoors, probably not very, but I need something to position these characters before combat begins so that when combat starts, I know who can use what card and who's going to not be able to participate, or who's going to be able to participate using something else. Well, what is the something else? The something else is where the D&D comes in, not D&D Ravenloft, but actual D&D. And what I've done is I've taken the characters from the D&D starter kit, and these are the printed out character sheets, for example, for this wizard number 1, and I am using them for the magic values. For this game, for this demo here, I'm just going to be using the magic that they have. So the wizard has been assigned per that certain cantrips and spells, and I've got a list of them somewhere here that he will be able to cast. Basically. So he's got the mage hand, the word I can never pronounce, Ray of Frost, Shocking Grasp, burning hands and a shield, and this is an indication of the range of it and a reference to the page number where it is explained in this player's handbook. So for the wizard and the cleric, they will be able to be using some of these spells here. Now, I'm not doing it for this game, or I should say for this demo. What you could very easily do to incorporate much more storytelling aspect, would be to have different types of encounters with the environment, with NPCs, with monsters that would utilize your skills and other aspects of a fully completed character sheet. And of course, you could make your own character. I didn't want to do that, so I printed these out from Wizards of the Coast website, but you have everything here for you, and this could very easily be incorporated into the story. The reason that I'm not doing that here is to film that would take quite some time, and I want to demonstrate really the structure here of the game aspect of the structure. I think it's very easy to see how you could bring in the role-playing, more of the role-playing part of it if you wanted to, using things like things I've used in other videos, Tome of Adventure Design, the Dungeon Design Guide, any of the Mythic Emulator, any of these types of mechanisms for asking and answering questions. But for right now, the mishmash is going to stick pretty closely to the main constructs of outdoor survival, which is the confusion about the travel, and we will be, in our turn, rolling on this direction ability chart and following these constraints. The pressure / luck and perhaps annoyance of the food and water index, and then the basic combat from Ravenloft and magic as it is going to be used by my two magic users from D&D. I pulled out my Dragonfire, and I have these great, I don't know if you can't really see it in the light. This was, I think, part of the expansion. This came with, when I traded for this game, these cards came with it, and I haven't really ever used them so much in play. These magic items, uncommon, here's a summoning gem. They're all foil stamped and really beautiful. Here's a detect magic scroll. You can sort of see it. It's again, early morning filming here at Geek Gamers, and there's a little bit, you can see a little bit of that. So I'm going to just, I think I'm going to say that I'm going to be searching for one of these magic items, and we'll just pull one out and see what. Now, I didn't really sort them by, there could be a common one here, but let's see. Well, we pulled in a rare, a rope of constriction. All right, well, that's pretty cool. Actually quite a nice looking card. Let's see if I can give you a better look at it to see what we're going to be searching for here. Is this, there we go. This rope of constriction, that's it. That's the magic item that we're going to be searching for, and it's going to be in house number 1, and now we're ready to roll. For those of you that follow along better by seeing something written out, I've jotted down a sequence of play here that I'll go over before we start, and I've indicated where I'm getting the rule from. So on the first turn of the game, we're going to draw an environment card to set the environment, and that's just from Castle Ravenloft. Then we will roll on our direction ability for the turn, and that's going to come directly from Outdoor Survival and will be from the mission card that we're doing here. Then we will move according to that, and the terrain effects will be strictly from Outdoor Survival, so we will be referring to the mapboard movement chart that comes with that game. And for the movement capacity that we have, we're looking at everything as a party. Initially, also from Outdoor Survival and Ravenloft, it matches up. We will begin with our life index at 6 movement points on A. And as we chart this down, our movement will go down. As it turns out, our lead character does have, the wizard has 6 movement points, and the fighter and the cleric only have 5, but we're just going to do party movement. So we'll start out with 6, and then thereafter it will be dictated by this life level chart from Outdoor Survival. We will then conduct our movement, and after we do the movement, we will roll for an encounter using my own encounter table that I have made, which will increase the likelihood of an encounter the longer we go without one. And then after that encounter, whatever it might be, we're going to roll on the natural hazards table from the scenario card of Outdoor Survival. And what this will mean is that if we get an X, nothing will happen. If we roll a 3 or a 5, which here tells us to remain stationary, what I'm interpreting this to mean is we're hanging around and therefore increasing the likelihood of an encounter. So we will then be drawing an encounter card from this Ravenloft deck. This is the event deck from Ravenloft. So if we roll that 3 or 5, that will happen because we've sort of lingered too long and we have to deal with something else. If we roll a combat on our own encounter table, we will then conduct combat. And as mentioned, the combat rules will come from Ravenloft as well as D&D for the magic users. After combat has concluded, or after this section, if there is no combat, we'll then move to the supply phase. And there's going to be 2 aspects of the supply phase. The lead player for the turn is going to have to do a supply check per the environment rules of D&D, basically as they are described here. For this part of the game, we're picking up some of the rules from here, and in particular, taking a look at this environmental section here in Chapter 8, where we have reference to food and water. And what I'm not going to do is, it talks about the rations here and the consumption. I'm not going to be measuring that per se, but I'm focusing on this here and modifying the rule. A character can go without food for a number of days equal to 3 plus his or her constitution modifier. At the end of each day beyond that, a character automatically suffers 1 level of exhaustion. We're going to take a look at this rule, and in the case of this party, focus on the value of the leading character when it's time to do the check. It's going to be a check against, I think it's going to be, basically it's going to be a difficulty class of 15. However, depending on an environmental card that may come in, that may change from a sort of medium or average check to a hard one, either of 20 or somewhere between 15 and 20. I'll have to make that decision on the fly, but that's going to be how we're getting the rule for whether or not we are consuming, moving down a level with our food and ultimately our water if we continue to move down with food or not. Let's orient ourselves at the beginning here. Unfortunately, my little party marker's in the shadows, but he'll move out of the shadows pretty soon. What we're trying to do our search for this magical item, we know that the magical item is going to be in this house here, or this landmark here, number 1. And maybe this is a secret road, I don't know. I talked about this map situation earlier. And in this case, as in pretty much everything I'm going to be demoing here, if you wanted to introduce more role-playing elements to this than I'm going to be demonstrating here, you could do it quite easily in terms of doing some investigation into the environment itself, asking questions, the way you would do just any type of solo RPG. But here, really, this is more of a game demo than an RPG demo, even though I'm using some of the D&D characteristics for my characters. In any case, here we go. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw an environment card, and the environment card, as mentioned, is drawn at the start of the first turn, and then thereafter it may or may not be drawn depending on the table and the rolls. What we've drawn is Blood Fog. A mystical reddish fog brings out the inner animal in the living and the dead. This is an environment card that's going to stay in play. Whenever a hero or monster attacks and rolls a natural 17 or higher, the target of the attack takes 1 additional damage. So we will need to remember that is part of the environment right now as we set off in the desert here, and then we're going to do our direction ability roll, which is coming straight from Outdoor Survival, and here's the table. Won't go through this level of detail with every turn, but just to start, I will. We rolled a 5. So we can start in any direction. After moving 1 or more hexes, we may make one direction change if desirable. Move as far as possible, subject to movement allowance and terrain restriction. We're starting right now with a movement allowance of 6, and this is due to our life level index, which is at full right now, and that gives us a 6. We are referring for all movement to the Outdoor Survival table here, and let me reorient so we can actually get a look at it. Here's the terrain effects chart, and as you can tell just from looking at the map, this is a map, I should say, with no particular scale, although the prior owner of my map has made a scale on it of 5 kilometers per hex, but I'm ignoring any scale here. And it is just random terrain. So there's mountains next to desert, next to woods and rough, and there are, I guess these are trails and things here. There's a river, or a number of rivers here, but what we're focusing on mostly is not the reality of whether terrain could change that much, but what the terrain is when you are actually in it. And we are beginning in the quadrant of the map that is a desert terrain, so it's 2 movement points per hex. So we have a movement value of 6, so we will be on our way to moving as directly as possible toward our goal, which is that house number 1. So that's what we're going to do initially, where it's going to take us here into, we'll just move starting here 1, 2, 3 hexes. Now again, this is either a road or a trail that someone has drawn in here. I'm going to pretend it isn't here for right now for this game, but I have some ideas about how this could be put into use in other situations, so you may see that again. But for right now, that's our movement. And we now need to roll on the encounter table. The encounter table is my homebrew table that is designed to simulate the fact that things will get more dangerous as time passes. And I should have shown I will be drawing a time counter for every movement point that happens, and not for every movement point. I will be drawing a time counter and placing it by the active character. There are 5 time counters in the game, so we'll scroll down and then come back up, and this is going to cycle through not only who is the lead character for that portion of the game, but it will also cycle through various checks that we need to do on our supply. So I neglected to point that out. For the encounter, this is also relevant to that time passing, because here is the encounter table, and you can see for the first passage of time, you will have an encounter only 30% of the time. For the second, 40%, etc. So to determine whether or not we're going to have an encounter, we will roll our D100, and we get 81, so there is no encounter now. The next phase of the turn sequence is the natural hazards table, and as a reminder, what happens here is we're rolling a d6 to determine whether we are continuing to move along and therefore have the same state as we had here, which is no encounter, or whether we've lingered, as in 3 or 6, and if so, then we need to pull an encounter card. Here we rolled a 4, so we continue along. We're walking through the blood fog, but we are moving. We haven't seen anybody yet. We're being pretty quiet. We don't need to conduct any combat. We do need, however, to check on supply now. So supply check is a 2-part thing. The lead player, which in this case is the wizard, needs to make a a DC 15 roll using his Constitution modifier and any other proficiency he has, in which case this is a +5, to see whether or not we consume anything or not, and we definitely do. So what's happening here now is we're starting to see a little bit of the outdoor survival situation happening. So what we are is, this is wrong here. So this is where we've begun. We are now moving down. We're beginning to move down in the food index because our wizard failed on the supply check. Once we get through to here and we lose a level, we will then move this water down one more too. So that happened, and then we need to further roll back to outdoor survival. Our wilderness encounter table here. We will be looking under the personal, and this is the vagaries of the outdoor survival game. We will be rolling our d6 to see whether we got anything. We rolled a 1, so we got back, actually, that food index. We gained this step back. So that was a net of nothing. And then finally, we need to roll on what I am then calling the environment to see at the beginning of the end of this turn, is anything changing in terms of the overall environment. This is back to the natural hazards, and if we get an X, we do not need to draw a new environment card. If we get a 3 or a 5 with some action, we do, and we got a 2, so we're still dealing with the blood fog, and that is the end of that turn. Second turn up, we now have the fighter as our lead character. 2 passages of time have occurred. We are going to roll on the direction to see where we're going here. We're going on 6. Start in any direction. After moving 1 or more hexes, you may make as many direction changes as desirable. You're not required to move at all and may move less. Well, it's not going to really impact things here because we're still here in the desert, but had we been closer to these mountains, it might have helped us out. So we're going to go use our full movement value just to move 3 more hexes, which is a value of 6 movement points, still in the desert here. And we are now going to roll on the encounter table, but in this case, we have a 40% chance of having an encounter. And we roll a 20. So indeed, there is going to be an encounter. The first thing that we need to do when we're having combat is to refer to my homebrew table here, the adjacency table. What I need this for is because the monster system from Ravenloft refers to, if you're familiar with that game, you know, different tiles and squares that the characters and monsters are on, and the monsters come on in specific places, and so there is the question of how close or far are they. Here, of course, this is all abstracted and not to scale at all, any type of scale. I'm mixing scales here. So before we get to combat, I need to know where things are going to stand. Literally, this is a D10 table, and it is based on the terrain as to the likelihood of our party being together, scattered, or afar. So let me see first where they're standing. They're 3, so they're together in the desert. What this means is that anything that a card that my character has or a tactic that the monster has that is referred to adjacency is going to be active. And I think there's also words like near and touch and self. These are spell distances. So this is really what is operative. There may be something I haven't covered, in which case I'll have to use my best judgment. I know what I mean when I say that we've rolled that they are standing together. So this is the first thing you need to do before you even pull in the monsters. Now, how do you get the monsters? These tiles here are from Ravenloft. I've pulled out, or put at the bottom really, the Ravenloft specific ones. The rest here are general indications of no monsters, 1 monster, 2 monsters, or 3 monsters, and that's going to tell us how many, if any, monster cards to pull in. So we will take a look at this and see that, of course, we have to start out fighting 3 monsters. So we will go to our monster pile, and as mentioned earlier, this is a fan-made pile of monsters that I think is a little bit broader themed than just the Ravenloft, which is why I'm using it here. We have pulled in a mimic. This is a beast, and it's going to be placed let's see, I can just turn over here. As you recall, we're pulling down the time token, so our lead character right now for the monster placement and some other things is the fighter. So the mimic is on the fighter. The scorpion, see that works thematically, is on our rogue, and the minotaur is on our cleric. So let's take a look here and see what we've got. Now, the combat cards have been assigned prior to, at the beginning of the game per Ravenloft rules in terms of what they get and how they can use them. The difference here in combat refers to the magic, so that the wizard and the cleric are both magic users, and they have spells and cantrips that they can cast. Now, I'm very much simplifying the D&D rules. We're not having anything with slotting and preparing spells. They've got what they've got. They can use everything they use is one action. So the way it's going to work is everybody's going to take one action, and then the monsters, if any remaining, are going to take one action. It's very simplified. I'm using these, I will be using these markers here to indicate who's taken an action. Actions can happen in any order. So let's take a look now, knowing that we are adjacent to everything. Let's just examine what this Minotaur is going to do. If the Minotaur is on a tile with a hero within 2 tiles, so in this case he's on the tile, he's going to attack with Battle Axe, which is +8 attack, and heroes moved 1 tile in the direction of the, whatever that says, I can't read, but that's going to be irrelevant. 4 experience here, it's got 3 hit points. That's going to be pretty tough for our cleric. Let's see. He could use a healing strike. This is an at-will power with a +8. It's for adjacency, and if we do that, somebody gains a hit point, so that's good. Let's see. He could, within 1 tile of you, somebody could get a plus bonus. Well, that's true. That could be used. Well, we're not doing that. Lance of Faith within 1 tile of you. We're not dealing with the undead. And we can get an extra attack action if we wanted to use that. We have to discard this card. This is from our item. We might, given the 3 hit points here, we might want to try to do that, but it's pretty early in the game to be doing that. So we have this healing strike with a +8 doing 1 damage. I mean, that's a possibility. For the rogue here, taking a look, it's adjacent. It's going to be a sting attack from the scorpion, +8, 2, and he's got a bunch of things he can probably use. Let's see. He's got some holy water that's not going to be relevant. That was a item he picked up. A bunch of, I didn't really sort through I just randomly took a treasure per those rules and didn't really sort through. So a lot of them are sort of Ravenloft specific, but well, he's certainly not going to bother to use that. Snipe shot within 1 tile of you. He can use adjacent. He gets a +7. Actually, this is pretty good because the way we have it set up, he is going to be adjacent to, the monster is going to be adjacent to somebody, so it's going to deal +1 damage, and actually this scorpion only has a 1. That's going to be pretty easy for this rogue, and can attack 1 monster within a tile of us. And then the fighter, let's see, the fighter's dealing with this mimic here, and on the same tile as a hero, attacks the closest hero with a ravening maw. Otherwise, he did nothing. Well, unfortunately, he's going to do that attack. Well, you get an extra treasure for destroying it. Well, that's pretty good. That's not going to be so hard either. Really, the challenge is, the most challenging one is this Minotaur. This is what the fighter's got. He can move heroes. Now, this card, of course, you can see is not really relevant. I would either discard it and pick another one or choose to interpret this as if I was, say, rolled for adjacency, which I just did, and I felt like somehow it would be better to be scattered, I could use this to make us scattered. That's sort of how I would interpret that. Obviously, when you're doing a mashup, you have to, you're going to come into points of interpretation. Regain hit points. Obviously, don't need to do that. Place that monster adjacent and attack it. We could get a +8 bonus on a trapping strike. That's pretty good. Just attack one adjacent. And we could do... Oh, well, that's pretty good. So this is, in effect, giving 1 damage to someone else also. So, but it's at a sacrifice. So we could cleave with a +6 and possibly do some damage maybe to the Minotaur also. But we could also do a trapping strike with a +8 to the Mimic. And this is our daily power, which I'm not really going to use. I don't need to do that right now. Certainly for this Mimic. Now, the wizard here is unopposed, but he has his spells, and so do so does the cleric. And one of the things that the wizard has is this mage hand, and I'm going to refer to the book here because I may want to take this action for him. Actually, I was wrong. I can't use Mage Hand because I thought I could use Mage Hand to maybe move one of these beasts around, but I can't lift anything more than 10 pounds, so that's going to be out. But I have this Shocking Grasp, and I'm going to attempt this. It's a melee spell attack. I'm going to attempt to have lightning spring from my hand to deliver a shock to a creature, and I'm going to skip over this target takes 1d8 lightning damage because the scale of that is wrong. So if I am successful in this, I will be delivering an attack of 1 damage, and I'm going to be targeting the Minotaur. Because we're all in the same place, I'm going to say that I can do that. This range of this is touch, but we're all sort of adjacent to each other and crowded here in this patch of sand. So what I need to do, and this is per the starter kit rules for my character, I have a +5 bonus to my roll, and it's going to be a difficulty class of 15. So we're going to, for the wizard's action, he's going to take this action first and attempt to put some damage on this Minotaur. And he rolls a 16. Oh, that's 1 short of, we remember this blood fog thing. If I rolled a 17 or higher, I would have given an additional damage. That would have been pretty awesome because if the cleric got him too, he could just get out. But whatever, our spell was successful. So what we will do is we sort of rose up and we reached across and we just shocked him and we cast that spell. This is our action for this round. We are out. The Minotaur now has 1 spot of damage on him. And let me turn to let's just look here. It's a little difficult to show you. Let's look at the clerics. Does the cleric have anything that can land 2 damage? Attack each monster on the tile. Well, you know, he does. He's got his Beacon of Hope. He's going to have to flip this card over. He only gets a +6 to it. These cards, again, per the Ravenloft rules, only flip back under certain circumstances through other cards. So is it worth him doing that now? Probably not. It's tempting, but I don't think so. I think he's going to go with his Lance of Faith, his basic at-will attack. It's just going to land 1 damage if it hits, and that's what we're going to do. So he's going to roll with a +6. He's looking to get a 16 or greater, so we're looking for a roll of 10 or greater for our cleric to land a hit. What is that? That is a 13, so great. So the Minotaur is wounded, bleeding. He's got 2 hits, but our cleric is done now and is going to end up facing the Minotaur, the wounded Minotaur, in the next round when the monsters get to go. But meanwhile, we still have the fighter with the Mimic, and let's take a look at what the fighter has here. I think we're going to go with, he's got this cleave. Choose another monster on your tile and move adjacent to it. That monster takes 1 damage. Well, you know what? So here's the thing. If we use this cleave, the way I'm interpreting it, and we get a hit, we can also put a hit on the Minotaur and get rid of him. That will give us a +6, or we could get this +8 and just attack the Mimic. But you know what? Why not? Let's try it. I mean, we're either going to get a big success or we're going to fail. Fail twice, in effect. So we're doing the same thing here. This Mimic has an armor class of 15, so we have a +6, so we're looking for a roll of an 11 or greater, and we got it. We got it. We definitely got it. So what we've done is we have dispensed with a Mimic, and we get 1 experience point for that. I'll talk about the experience in a moment. We also get a treasure card, so let me just pull in the treasure card. What was that Mimic holding? That Mimic gives us a short rest. Play as fortune, immediately flip up one of your used powers. Well, we didn't actually use a power that we had to flip over, so that's unfortunate, but whatever, we got 1 experience point. And I'll say here that experience in this game works somewhat similarly, that for every 5 experience it can be pooled, and in this case it's just going to give you some more treasure. So I'm not dealing with the leveling up. I said it works similar. It works differently. I'm not dealing with the leveling up of the characters from Ravenloft. You could certainly do that. Now, so our fighter's taken his turn and also has put a wound on the Minotaur through his cleave, through his action of this power. And though the Minotaur now has, whoops, wrong. The Minotaur has now been dispensed with because he already had the 2, basically everybody ganged up on the Minotaur. So the Minotaur is gone, and the Minotaur is going to be giving 4 experience points to the party, and we already have 1, so that's great. We already have the 5. We're going to get a treasure from him. Let's see, what did he have? Burst of speed, plays fortune immediately. Your hero can move his or her speed. Well, again, I did not sort through these. We'll just, whatever it is, it is. I didn't really sort through the treasure cards. Had I been paying attention, I might have pulled out ones that really were not relevant items or effects. But nevertheless, Minotaur is gone, and we don't have to deal with facing that damage on the cleric. And what do we have left? Well, the Mimic also is gone because it did take the 1 damage of that attack, and we have remaining the Scorpion and the Rogue. So this turned out not to be so bad, potentially not to be so bad. We're not even going to see the monsters coming after us if we can get rid of this Scorpion. We will choose to use, doesn't really matter. We could deal +1 damage. We don't even need it. The best we're going to get, I think, is a +7 here. And the Scorpion, as you would expect, though, this got a tough shell, so it's got an armor class of 17. It's pretty rough. Let's see. Do we have anything? It's so early on. We don't really have anything more than that. So I think we will. I think we'll just try to stab it in the back, and we'll have a +7 to our roll, but we need to be getting a 17 or greater. So we'll see if our rolling well continues, and it does not. So we fail on the Scorpion, and that is the end of the first round here. And now what's going to happen is we are going to have to face the Scorpion's attack. Let's look again and remind ourselves that it is adjacent, so it's going to sting us. It's going to get a +8, and it's going to do 2 damage. We have an AC of 14, so we will, my poor math skills are going to come into play here, but let's see how the Scorpion rolls to attack us. And the Scorpion rolled well. The Scorpion rolled a 12, +8 is certainly enough to land 2 hits on us. The way I've done the hit points here is I've placed them on, and I'm going to be removing them. It's just easier for me to see how much health somebody has doing it this way than I think the other way around, which is how I think the Ravenloft game is meant to be played. So our rogue got stung, basically, and now the combat continues on in the next round, and we will move back into that. And I'm not going to go through and show you that because I think effectively somehow this Scorpion is going to be dispensed with. So that was a brief look inside one way of playing a version of D&D with a version of outdoor survival. I think what I failed to show you was the outdoor survival box, which I will show you right now. Sort of cool. Right here. And the game itself, the outdoor survival game itself, is quite luck-based, as you can see with the movement and potentially rolling, so you're wandering around and not getting anywhere. Didn't really show up in the few turns that we took here, but I feel that putting them together in this way gives a little bit of more flavor to the game. It takes the Ravenloft characters outside and moves them around with a little modification. I think it works pretty well. As you could see, I didn't quite sort through my treasure cards well enough to make good use of them. The flexibility really can come when you add in more and more D&D rules for things that happen, whether it is spells and the level of detail that you want to get there. You could certainly, as I mentioned earlier, create NPCs and actually have them interact with the environment, have your characters interact with the environment on that level too, because there are these houses here, there are places where people could be, even in the forests, and you could decide, for example, that the icons that represent the deer, the food supply, are also perhaps, maybe there are hunters that are with these animals and you could interact with them and talk to them. So it is the game that you create can be the foundation for branching off into more of a role-playing aspect and give you some foundation, just the physical nature of the map and the sequence of play, which is in a lot of ways antithetical to classic RPGs in a group, really can help the solo player branch out into the story, because you can always come back to the bigger mission, what you're doing. I made something very basic. We're trying to get here and get some magic item, but you could very easily make much more of a story out of that. You could have side quests that happen. You could decide that you need to investigate something that's going on in another region before you get there or whatever. It's really up to you and your imagination.